There are four questions I ask myself about all pieces of legislation. What I introduce out of our shop, as well as how I vote on the floor of the House. The four questions are these. The first one, is it right? And by that I mean, is it right? Does it fit the Judeo-Christian principles, the biblical principles that this nation was founded upon? Secondly, is it constitutional according to the original intent? What James Madison Company meant for it to be. Third, do we need it? And fourth, can we afford it? All four questions have to be yes for me to vote yes. If one of those questions is no, then my vote's no. Now, we see a lot of people who talk about the Constitution, skip over the first two and go just to can we afford it or do we need it, and vote that way. And that's the way conservatives frequently vote. But I think we cannot separate the first two from the second two. So that's the way we operate. That's who I am. I came here to Washington to hopefully push the Republican Party back to its moorings of limited government, low taxes, and very little intrusion in people's lives. The Republican Party has left those moorings, particularly during the first 6 years of the Bush presidency. And I'll do everything I can to make the Republican Party go back to those moorings of just leaving people alone so that they can run their families, run their lives, run their jobs without all the government intrusion. That's what Republicans are supposed to be. The Senate, from what I understand and talking to some Senate colleagues just this morning, is that Senator Dodd is looking at pushing this forward very quickly if the health care dies in the House, which hopefully it will. And frankly, I've talked to bankers, I've talked to small business folks in my district, and the financial regulations that the Senate's pushing forward are going to further be a tax upon small business. It's going to make money more tight in the financial sector. I think there are going to be regulations that are going to be disastrous to our economy and going to make things worse. So everything I see out of the leadership, whether it's the president, whether it's Nancy Pelosi or Harry Reid, is anti-economy. It's pro-central control. It's anti-freedom and anti-liberty, and it's totally adverse to what we need today. When you put taxes and regulation on small business, on industry, all it does is drive up the cost. It makes the quality of the service or the goods worse. I believe in the magic of the free marketplace. I think the marketplace is the best way to control quality, quantity, and cost of all goods and services, as long as it's not constrained by regulation and taxes. So by getting the regulatory burden and the tax burden off of business and industry is the best way to create jobs, the best way to get our economy back on track. It's the best way to control all cost, quality, everything. So the more regulations we put on the back of our economy, the worse it's going to be, in my opinion. I've challenged Democrats. I've challenged Democrats in an op-ed written in the Washington Times. I wrote that along with John Shattuck from Arizona and Charlie Dent from Pennsylvania. We challenged Democrats to introduce a Democratic bill. We'll give them the legislative language. Does four things. Cross-state line purchases for businesses and individuals. Number two, to have association pools so that anybody in this country could join an association and have huge pools. Number three, have states set up high-risk pools to cover people who are not insurable with pre-existing conditions. And number four, have tax fairness so that everybody could deduct 100% of their tax of their health care costs, including the insurance costs, would totally change the dynamics of health care. I've talked to Democrats, back to another question, I've talked to Democrats individually and challenged them, saying, listen, why don't you introduce this bill? I'll give you the legislative language, you can put your name in the blank. You work it on your side, we will work it on our side. I think we'd have 300 plus votes for that bill. And in fact, I've had Democrats say, we could get a lot of votes on their side. But over and over, I've been told by Democrats, I can't introduce it, I can't push it, I'll be punished by my leadership if we do that. The leadership, the progressives, the Nancy Pelosi's of this world are so bent on a government takeover of the healthcare system that they can't even allow their reasonable Democrats to put forth that bill, which would make sense. It would lower the cost for everybody. It wouldn't fix all the problems, no, but it would be a big, big first step to lower the cost of your health insurance, of everybody's health insurance that's buying it out there, and it would change the dynamics of healthcare financing in the country. But they can't. Why? Because Nancy Pelosi won't let them.
Congressman, you've called yourself a strict constitutionalist.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think this country has been drifting away from those principles?
Well, there's no doubt about it. In fact, if you look in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8 enumerates or lists the things that Congress can pass laws about. It's only 18 things. National security, national defense should be the major function of the federal government under the Constitution. What that means to most people is that all the tax dollars that they send to Washington, only a very small percentage of those tax dollars are actually spent on truly constitutional issues. I believe in the Constitution. As long as the people of Georgia continue to send me up here, I'm going to be continuing to fight for very limited government and get the government out of the way so people can live their lives in freedom and with liberty, as our founding fathers meant for us to be able to do.
Representative Slaughter has introduced what they've called a slaughter rule here on the health care bill. Mm-hmm. What do you see as a problem with that rule?
Well, it's totally unconstitutional. Article 1, Section 7, the second paragraph in that section lays out how bills are passed into law. In that paragraph, it says that every bill passed into law has to be voted on by the House and the Senate. Has to be the same bill that both houses agree to. Then it's sent to the president for his signature, and then it goes on to talk about how to override a veto if he doesn't sign it. It also says that when those bills are presented to the House and Senate, it must be voted upon. The yeas and nays must be counted, and those yeas and nays must be listed by person in the journal for that particular House. The slaughter rule doesn't do that, so it's totally unconstitutional. It's a trick that the leadership in the House are doing to try to force a health care bill down the throats of the American people that America does not want. And it's just, they'll do anything to try to get this through. They show their arrogance, their ignorance, and their incompetence by doing exactly what they're doing. They're showing their arrogance because they don't listen to the American people. They're showing their ignorance about the disastrous effects that health care bill will have upon everybody's health insurance, about the quality of medicine. And they're showing their incompetence because they're trying to change every single constitutional rule to try to force through their policies and their philosophies.
And thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Ken Hoagland. I'm chairman of the Online Tax Revolt, which you'll find at onlinetaxrevolt.com. I'm also chairman of the Fair Tax National Campaign. The Online Tax Revolt is a chance for every American who cannot physically come to Washington for April 15th to choose a little avatar and march across a Google Earth map and arrive here to lend their voice to really a national protest and join those who are coming for the fair tax, for the flat tax, for the Reagan tax cutters, for those who understand what unifies all of us is that we cannot control our government. Our federal government will never be controlled until we repair or rip out by the roots and replace the corrupted federal tax system. When I walked in here this morning, I heard the congressman talking about the Constitution. And he was talking right as I came in a few minutes late about the growth of federal authority and how it has eclipsed states' rights, state power. That was a very important check and balance that the Founding Fathers built in to unrestrained growth by the federal government. There were all kinds of checks and balances built in. But what we have seen since the income tax was passed almost 100 years ago is unrestrained growth of the federal government and the state rolls smaller and smaller in their authority. Our Founding Fathers understood that all governments gather power to themselves. And I want to suggest to you it's not ideological, it's human. I want to suggest to you that the corruption of the income tax code is not ideological. It's human. People on the Ways and Means Committee, the Senate Finance Committee, and the Joint Committee on Taxation are treated like royalty. They have lines outside Ways and Means. You know what it's called, Gucci Gulch. Why? Because the shoes the lobbyists wear, the wealthiest lobbyist in this town, cost more than most of our monthly house payments. 18,000 changes since Ronald Reagan brought about simplification of the tax code. 67,500 pages of regulations. No one can understand it. I'm going to suggest to you that no law is just if it can't be understood. We spent $310 billion last year filling out paperwork before we paid a penny of tax. If we want a full recovery, it's going to happen in small businesses. Right now, according to recent studies, small businesses are paying $700 in tax compliance cost for every $100 of tax they pay. They are buying and selling pieces of the tax code every day Congress is in session. And that will not change until there is a check and balance. That check and balance at the heart of all of the issues that we talk about is what fuels the growth and the power of the federal government, and that is the income tax code. Now, there's disagreement on how best to reform it. Steve Forbes and the flat tax, there's tax reform groups here in Washington that are always working for their point of view, whether it's the AFL-CIO or Americans for Tax Reform. It is, I want to suggest to you, and this is somewhat threatening to the culture here in Washington, part of the game, can we make the corruption of the tax writing committees work for our point of view? I want to suggest that that is the wrong approach. Now, I am a passionate advocate of the fair tax, and we have been growing in leaps and bounds over the last couple of years. The Online Tax Revolt is growing at about 1,000 an hour. We should be up to about 190,000 people right now. You join a team if you want, or you march on your own. And it's Michael Reagan and Neil Bortz and Joe the Plumber and veterans and seniors and those who want a restoration of the Constitution, all coming to Washington to lend their voice, with hope, with a lot of anger, because of what you all have seen. There is a growing chasm between the will of the people and the behavior of their government. Now, you go back 237 years to the Boston Tea Party, we rallied around no taxation without representation. I want to suggest to you that pledging the future earnings of unborn generations of Americans is taxation without representation all over again. When government officials act irrespective of the will of the people, it is a new aristocracy that's been established here in Washington. It will not stop until we stop that corruption of the tax code.